Today, we are going to pull back the curtain on politics. We're diving into a book called The Dictator's Handbook, and it's got this single, really powerful logic that honestly explains the behavior of pretty much everyone in power, from presidents and prime ministers to corporate CEOs and even small-town managers. You ever just watch the news and scratch your head? I mean, a dictator stays in power while their country is literally starving, or a CEO runs their company right into the ground, gets fired, and then walks away with a massive golden parachute. We usually just say, oh, they're bad people, or that's just a corrupt system. But what if these aren't just one-off situations? What if this is actually how the game is designed to work? And that leads us to the book's central and, yeah, pretty cynical idea. It argues that we've been looking at this all wrong. What we see as bad behavior is, from the leader's point of view, just good politics. It's the smartest, most rational way for them to get power and, crucially, to keep it. So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the puzzle itself. Then we're going to unpack the book's core theory and what it calls the rules for rulers. We'll see how those rules explain the huge differences between dictatorships and democracies, apply that same logic to the surprising world of foreign aid, and finally ask the big question: can understanding all of this actually help make things any better? Okay, so let's start with that puzzle. The world is just full of examples that make absolutely no sense if you assume that leaders are trying to do what's best for their people or their shareholders. The book says we have to stop focusing on their personalities and start focusing on the political game they're all forced to play. So let me take you to a small, kind of unassuming city in California called Bell. Back in 1993, the town was almost bankrupt. So they hired a city manager, a guy named Robert Rizzo. And on the surface, he was a miracle worker. For 15 years in a row, he balanced the budget. The mayor loved him, praised him for saving the town. He looked like the perfect public servant. But then, in 2010, the real story came out. Robert Rizzo, the city manager of this tiny town, was pulling in an annual salary of almost $800,000. To put that into perspective, that's more than the President of the United States. And the craziest part? It was all totally legal. It was approved by the city council, whose members were also paying themselves pretty generously. And this is the whole point of the book right here. The story of Bell, California isn't just some weird one-off case of greed. It's a perfect little model of how politics works everywhere. See, Rizzo wasn't serving the 35,000 people who lived in Bell. No, he was serving the tiny handful of city council members he needed to keep his job, and he made sure they were well rewarded for their loyalty. And that, in a nutshell, is the universal logic of politics. So what is this logic? Well, the book leads out a framework it calls selectorate theory. It's a tool you can use to look at any organization, a country, a company, whatever, and figure out why its leaders do what they do. And according to this theory, the number one goal of any leader isn't to help people or build a great company. It's much simpler than that. It's just to survive, to stay in power. Right, so what this slide is telling us is, forget all the fancy terms like national interest or the public good. The theory says if you want to understand why a leader does something, you just need to know one thing: who keeps them in power. Nobody rules alone. Every single leader depends on a group of people, a winning coalition, and their main job day in and day out is just keeping that group happy. Everything else is secondary. So the theory breaks down any political system into three groups. Think of them like circles of power. On the very outside, you have the interchangeables. That's everybody who could possibly be a supporter, so all the citizens in a country. Then you move one circle in, and you've got the influentials, the people who actually have a voice in picking the leader, like voters or the members of a political party. And then at the very center, the most important group of all, the essentials. This is your winning coalition, the small group a leader absolutely cannot afford to lose. For a dictator, this might just be a few key generals. The entire game of politics is just managing this one tiny group. And all of this leads to 5 brutally simple rules for any ruler who wants to hang on to their job. Number 1, keep your essential coalition as small as you can possibly get away with. The fewer people you have to pay off, the better. 2, keep the pool of potential replacements, the interchangeables, really large. That makes your supporters nervous and keeps them in line. 3, and this one is huge, control the money. 4, reward your essentials with private goodies, cash, contracts, you name it, not with good policies for everybody. And 5, the rule that explains so much of the world's misery: never, ever take money from your essentials to make the lives of the masses better. Okay, so that's the theory. Let's see how it actually plays out in the real world. The book argues that the biggest difference between a democracy and a dictatorship isn't about ideals or culture. It's just about the size of that winning coalition. It's all a numbers game. And this chart just lays it out so clearly. Look, when your coalition is small, like in a dictatorship, you buy loyalty with private rewards for your inner circle. You don't care about competence. In fact, it can be a threat. You want loyal cronies. But when your coalition is large, like in a democracy, you can't possibly give private cash to millions of people. It's just too expensive. So the most efficient way to pay them is with good public policy. Things like roads, schools, clean water, a healthy economy. All of a sudden, behaving well becomes good politics. This way of thinking also helps explain a really famous puzzle in economics known as the resource curse. It's this bizarre thing where countries with tons of natural wealth, like oil or diamonds, often have the most poverty and corruption. I mean, how can being rich in resources make you poor? Well, because if you're a dictator, oil money is the absolute best kind of money. You can see it in the data. The more a country depends on natural resources, the slower its economy tends to grow. Why? Because you don't need your people to be productive or educated to get rich. You just pump it out of the ground. That money lets you pay off your small coalition and completely ignore everyone else. You have zero incentive to invest in them because you just don't need them. And if you want to see the most extreme example, look at Indonesia's former president, Suharto. The guy ruled for over 30 years. By the time he was done, it's estimated that he and his family had siphoned off as much as $35 billion. That's not a flaw in his system. From the perspective of political survival, that is the system working perfectly. He controlled the money, kept his coalition happy, and stayed in power for decades. Okay, so let's take this logic and apply it to something we normally think of as a good thing, foreign aid. The book makes a really challenging argument here, that aid, a lot of the time, isn't helping the poor. It's actually reinforcing the very systems that keep them poor. The authors say we need to stop thinking of foreign aid as a gift. It's not. It's a political deal. It's a transaction between one leader and another leader. And its main purpose isn't to help the people on the ground. It's to help both leaders solve their own political survival problems back home. So here's how a typical deal works. You have a Democratic leader, say a US president during the Cold War. He needs to show his millions of voters that he's tough on communism. Then you have an autocratic leader, like Sergeant Doe in Liberia. He needs cash, and he needs it fast, to pay his small group of soldiers to keep him in power. So the US gives Doe's government millions in aid money. In return, Doe makes some anti-Soviet speeches. The US president gets a policy win for his voters. Sergeant Doe gets the cash to pay off his cronies. And the only people who really lose out? The actual citizens of Liberia. And you know, this famous quote supposedly from FDR about a dictator in Nicaragua just sums it all up, doesn't it? Foreign policy often isn't about right and wrong. It's about political survival. Democratic leaders figure out that autocrats are cheap to buy. They can deliver policies that American voters want, and because they only have to please a few people, you can get those policies for a bargain. So after hearing all of this, it's really easy to feel kind of pessimistic, right? I mean, the logic seems unbreakable, and the results are pretty grim. So the final, and I think most important question the book asks is, if this is really how it works, is any positive change even possible? So are we just stuck with this? Is it hopeless? Well, the book's answer is surprisingly no. But the solution isn't at all what you might think. The authors argue that just waiting around and hoping for a good leader to show up is basically a waste of time. Even a well-intentioned leader is trapped by the rules of the game. If they don't pay off their coalition, they'll just get replaced by someone who will. The only way to create real, lasting change is to change the rules themselves. And the key to that is to do everything you can to make that winning coalition bigger. The more people a leader depends on, the more they are forced to shift from buying loyalty with private cash to earning it with good public policy. The goal is to build a system where a leader's own self-interest aligns with the interests of the people. So this theory gives us a really powerful and, maybe uncomfortable new way to look at the world. It suggests that politics, when you strip it all down, is a science of self-preservation. It asks us to look past the headlines, forget the personalities for a second, and instead ask one simple question about any leader anywhere. Who does this person need to keep happy, and how big is that group? Once you start asking that question, it's really hard to see the world the same way ever again.